There is a moment, quiet, unremarkable, when most people first go into debt. It might be a medical bill sitting on the kitchen counter, or a credit card used to cover groceries during a slow month, or a student loan signed at 18 without fully understanding what it means. At $500, debt feels manageable, almost invisible. You tell yourself you'll handle it next paycheck, and you probably will. But what happens when that number doesn't stop at $500? What happens when it climbs to $5,000, then $50,000, then beyond? The math changes, the psychology changes, and quietly, so does your life. At $500 in debt, the primary experience is not financial, it's psychological. The number is small enough to ignore, which is precisely what makes it dangerous. Research in behavioral economics consistently shows that humans are loss-averse, but not always action-oriented. We feel the discomfort of owing money, but the discomfort rarely exceeds our inertia. So $500 sits. It accumulates interest at 22% APR on the average American credit card, and within a year, without any new spending, that $500 has quietly become $610. The debt didn't grow because of a crisis, it grew because of stillness. By $5,000, something shifts. This is the level where debt begins to influence decisions. You start thinking twice before going out. You hesitate on car repairs. A $5,000 balance at 22% APR requires roughly $150 a month just to make meaningful progress. And for millions of Americans earning between $35,000 and $50,000 a year, that $150 is not abstract. It's a real trade-off against rent, food, and utilities. Studies from the American Psychological Association have found that financial stress at this range begins to impair cognitive function, narrowing attention and reducing the quality of long-term decision-making. Debt at $5,000 is no longer just a number. It's starting to quietly occupy mental space. At $20,000, the architecture of daily life begins to reorganize around the debt. This is the average American credit card debt for households that carry a balance. At this level, minimum payments alone, typically around $400 per month, can consume an entire paycheck for a lower income earner. The insidious mathematics here is that if you only make minimum payments on $20,000 at 22% APR, you will spend over 15 years paying it off and hand the lender nearly $24,000 in interest alone, more than the original balance. You will have paid for the same debt twice. This is not a hypothetical. This is the standard outcome for millions of people who were never taught how compound interest works against them. By $50,000, debt has typically become structural. At this range, you are often looking at a combination: student loans, a car note, medical debt, and credit cards layered on top of one another. Each carries its own interest rate, its own minimum payment, its own psychological weight. The financial term for this is debt service burden, and when it exceeds 35 to 40% of your gross income, lenders consider you a high-risk borrower. But more importantly, you begin to feel it not just in your bank account, but in your identity. Research on financial shame shows that people in this range often begin to avoid financial conversations entirely, stop opening certain mail, and quietly disengage from retirement planning, not because they don't care, but because the gap between where they are and where they want to be feels too wide to cross. At $100,000 in debt, the conversation becomes about systems rather than willpower. This is the range where individual discipline alone is rarely sufficient. A person carrying $100,000 in debt, perhaps from graduate school, a business that didn't work, or a medical emergency without adequate insurance, is not in this position because of laziness or poor character. They are often in this position because the systems around them, healthcare pricing, higher education financing, predatory lending structures, were designed in ways that made this outcome statistically likely for a significant portion of the population. Getting out requires not just budgeting, but structural intervention, income restructuring, debt consolidation, or in some cases legal tools like bankruptcy, which exists precisely because societies have long recognized that permanent debt bondage serves no one. And then there is $500,000. At this level, for most non-homeowners, debt of this magnitude is either the result of a business collapse, catastrophic medical costs, or a combination of life events that compounded over years. The psychological profile here is often described by financial therapists as learned helplessness, a state in which the numbers feel so large that the brain stops generating solutions and begins simply enduring. But even here, the mathematics of resolution exist.
Income-driven repayment plans, asset restructuring, negotiated settlements, and long-term debt management programs have helped people navigate out of even these extremes, though rarely quickly and never without cost.
What every level of debt shares, from $500 to $500,000, is this: the number itself is almost never the whole story. Behind every balance is a decision made under pressure, a system that extracted more than it gave, or a moment when information that should have been taught simply wasn't. Understanding debt as a mathematical system rather than a moral failure is not about removing accountability. It is about seeing clearly, because you cannot navigate something you refuse to look at directly. The first step out of debt, at any level, is always the same. You have to stop looking away.